Sun, sand and sea. You couldn't have asked for a better setting for a Cricket World Cup. The Cricket World Cup was coming to the West Indies for the very first time, but dare I say, this turned out to be a damp squib. Arguably, the most depressing World Cup of them all, and I only say it as an Indian fan. The other reasons that were attributed to this World Cup not being very successful was the fact that you had a lot of one-sided encounter. The other thing was that it went on for a period of 47 days. The entire format of this World Cup came under questioning. But in this edition of World Cup Rewind, I'm Nikhil, with me Rajdeep Sardesai. There will be more controversies, Rajdeep, than really some cricketing memories to talk about.
That's right. Hello and welcome once again to World Cup Rewind. And I think Nikhil has dressed appropriately. At least he's got the right trousers for this show. It was a black World Cup for us. It was a black day. A black tournament, a dark tournament for Indian cricket. When you look at all the World Cups over the years, you could go back to 1975 when we were just not prepared for what a 60-over World Cup required. But I think 2007, Indian cricket had just reached the finals in 2003, was looking up, was doing extremely well overseas in the early 2000s under Sourav Ganguly's captaincy, had done very well under Rahul Dravid's captaincy as well. And then you have this World Cup disaster. It is nothing more than a disaster when you don't even qualify for the Super 8s. I mean, 12, you know, when you can't beat teams within the subcontinent who are conveniently placed in your group. You didn't even have any of the mighty South Africans, Australians, or the English in your group, and yet you don't qualify for the Super 8s. It was an altogether depressing World Cup. And, you know, Nikhil, the fact is it was the West Indies. Yep. I know a friend of mine who booked tickets for all India's matches and thought India would go all the way to the final because he thought this was his chance to sort of be on a Caribbean cruise of sorts in the West Indies. He was most depressed. It was really a depressing World Cup.
Okay, we're in Barbados at the moment where the final was played, but the final is still quite a distance away from our story. We are starting with the Indian campaign, and I was in the West Indies covering this World Cup, reached there a week in advance to build up for this tournament. And Rajdeep, I must tell you, India had a great start. They played 2 practice matches, one against the Netherlands, won very easily, the other against West Indies, which was looking like a tough team playing at home. And even that game, India won by 9 wickets. You know, Rahul Dravid, the captain, a star-studded Indian team with Greg Chappell as coach. Much was expected out of this Indian team, but then comes the first match, 17th of March, versus a team which is still considered minnows in international cricket, the Bangladesh. I remember Port of Spain, that entire stadium packed with Indian fans. There were just a handful of Bangladeshi supporters who had been probably staying there or come from maybe close by from the US and you know, various other places. And the game starts with India batting. It's a disappointing batting performance by the Indian team. There is only 60 odd that Sourav Ganguly gets, then 40 odd that Yuvraj Singh gets. You still feel it's a par total. India might be able to win this, and this is an Indian batting lineup that bats till number 10. The coach is Greg Chappell. You've got, I think, Zahir batting at 10, Ajit Agarkar at 9, yet they can't get a big total on board. And then you expect, okay, Bangladesh might stutter, and that's what happens with weak teams. They don't. They play handsomely, win that game, and that is what sets the cat amongst the pigeons, because you're worried the format of the tournament is such.
That's right. You know, you have 4 teams in a group and 2 go through. Yeah. When you lose one match, then you're in a knockout situation from your very second match. My brother-in-law, incidentally, is a Bangladeshi and a complete cricket addict. You know, Bangladesh cricket addicts are a bit like the Indian cricket addicts of the 70s and 80s, just obsessed with the sport. Win or lose, they always were with the team. And for them, beating India was probably the biggest thing that could have happened to Bangladeshi cricket. They always thought they could punch above their weight, but were just not being able to do so. They were a good side, mind you. And, you know, we were discovering just how good they could be. The thing about West Indies, Nikhil, my sense is, contrary to popular perception, a lot of the wickets can be low and slow. So the Bangladeshis, who otherwise might struggle in other overseas conditions, actually found, with their spinners in particular and a few of their sort of medium paces as well, the conditions were ideally suited to them. India just had a bad day. India had a bad tournament. And we
Yes.
should speak about, Greg Chappell, whom you referred to later in the show.
Yes. So what happens in this game? As you said, this Indian team filled with a lot of stars, but then still you could say an aging team. Bangladesh was a young team. So you had their bowlers first, the two left-arm spinner, one of them Abdul Razak picked 3 wickets apiece, and then you have a young Mashrafe Murtaza who's quick by Asian standard as such. For Bangladesh standards, he picks up 4 wickets. India can't really get their batting going, and then when they come out to bowl, I still remember watching that game, and Tamim Iqbal starts in an aggressive fashion, hits Zahir Khan for a couple of boundaries, and this Bangladesh team. And funnily, this is that Bangladesh team then go on to become quite a force in white ball cricket. You've got the young Tamim Iqbal, we don't know much about him. You have a Mushfiqur who then becomes a very good wicketkeeper batsman, a young Shakibul Hasan, and these are the 3 players that go and get 50. In that total, that could have been tricky to chase, but go on to win that game. I still remember those few Bangladeshi fans, I interviewed them after the game, they had that tiger in their hand, and they were elated. Yet, at that time, we thought India could go through. Greg Chappell, yes, his coaching, all of these things will come into, a lot more scrutiny when we talk about India's next game. That will be versus Sri Lanka. But I'm staying with the 17th of March because India is in Port of Spain, in Trinidad. On the same day, there is another Asian team, Pakistan. They are playing Ireland, and that again is a game that you think that they will, really smooth and scrape through very easily, and they only put up 132 runs on the board. And this is a Pakistan team. I'm going to take some of the batsmen. You have the Yusuf Yohannas, you have the Yunus Khan, you have an Inzamamul Haq, you have a Shoaib Malik, you have a Mohammad Hasif, you have Azhar Mahmood. So this is their batting lineup. All they can get is 132 versus that, again, a rank outsider in Ireland. And from there on, you think they can win it. The bowlers do their job, but there's only one man standing between them and victory. Niall O'Brien gets 72, and they chase 132. And Pakistan is another team that is knocked out of that World Cup.
Nikhil, sometimes Indian fans tend to clutch on to straws. And if the only straw that you can clutch on to in the 2007 World Cup, it's this, that if we did badly, the Pakistanis did as badly, if not worse.
Yes.
Both teams get knocked out in the group stages, which is terrible for a tournament because you've got all these Pakistani and Indian fans who live in the US, who want to come to the Caribbean from across the world, and they don't have their 2 fancy teams in the last 8. With India, it's the coach who comes under scanner.
Yes.
With Pakistan, it's also the coach, more tragically, who comes under the scanner. I think the World Cup has always been full of drama, as we've been recounting over the years. But what happens with Bob Woolmer, the Pakistan coach, found dead in his bathroom tub, is according to me one of the saddest stories of the World Cup. And there was a lot of speculation as to what might have happened. There was talk of the pressure that he was under, alleged fight that he had with Inzamamul Haq after the defeat. Reports of match fixing going on, all rumors swirling around. But he was a very fine gentleman.
Yes.
If you ever met Bob Woolmer, he was a man of few words, but he was a man of cricket who traveled across the world, coached teams, scored a memorable century against the West Indies once as a player. To hear that he was dead really sort of brings some perspective. You can lose a cricket match. You don't want to lose your coach in those circumstances. It was tragic, and as I said, this World Cup will be remembered for all the wrong reasons by both India and Pakistan.
Right, so that was 17th of March. Pakistan lose their first game to West Indies, lose the next game to Ireland, are eliminated. It's the very next day. It's on the 18th of March that news comes in that Bob Woolmer, the Pakistan coach, has been found dead in the bathroom of his hotel room. I remember that day very clearly, Rajdeep. In fact, the Indian team's practice session was on. They had lost the game to Bangladesh. Up next, just a day's gap, up next was going to be Bermuda for them. So that day's gap after the loss to Bangladesh, customary team practice, and the teams finished practice, and they've gone into their dressing room. I get a phone call from my office in New Delhi saying this is the report that's just come through, that Bob Woolmer has been found dead. and you need to do a live phone in, and I do that. As soon as I put the phone down, the Indian team is going and sitting in the bus. I am the bearer of the bad news. I go to Greg Chappell. I tell him, Greg, we've just heard Bob Woolmer has been found dead. And they were good friends. They'd known each other for a very long time. And I remember Greg Chappell actually sits down. He's entering the bus. He just sits down on the stairs of the bus. And he doesn't know what's really hit him. He keeps sitting there for a couple of minutes. Then the news travels to the rest of the Indian team. Anyway, you've lost the first game. It's depressing times. And he goes on from there. A colleague of mine at that time, Afsha, we were both together. She's then told quickly, get a ticket. One of you has to go there to Jamaica. We were only following the Indian team. She goes to Jamaica. And then what happens after that? Every single day, there's some other report coming in. First bit is that we are told that he's died of a heart attack. A few days later, there's investigation. The police closed the investigation saying it's a natural death. But then you have medical reports that come out that say that no, he could have died of strangulation. That just opens up a Pandora's box. And then there are furthermore investigations into the matter. An entire investigation committee is set up. You have a few former players. I remember Clive Rice and Ian Chappell come out and say that, listen, this has to be a little bit more than just Pakistan losing a game. These match fixers are all there. They could go to any extent to do things, and that might have some sort of a connection to match fixing. That investigation goes on for 2 months. At that time, they can't conclude much as to what has happened. And another investigation is then launched. Till today, that investigation, this happens in March. The final investigation comes out in November. There's an 11-member jury. They give an open verdict, which means that yes, the circumstances are not very clear how he died. So till today, we don't know whether it was because of natural causes or whether something else had happened. So it was an open verdict that was delivered eventually. You had many verdicts, but the eventual verdict was an open verdict at the time.
That, as I said, extremely depressing news to get. India, meanwhile, go to play Bermuda.
India play Bermuda, make 413 runs. Everyone makes merry. There is a Virender Sehwag who's batting at number 3. First game opens, then next game is pushed to number 3, gets 100. There's a Yuvraj Singh who gets 80 odd. India get 413 and win by a huge margin. The one thing, though, I will remember from that game is Dwayne Leverock. Became world famous. That catch he takes in the slip, all of 127 kilos. Parallel to the ground, taking that catch.
I was coming into the show, and in the car, I went into the old YouTube video of Leverock's catch. And you just think about it, he looks, appears, and probably is little more than an averagely good club cricketer, like a number of the Bermuda team members were. And yet he takes this one catch of Robin Uthappa, flying in the slip, which will go down as one of the greatest catches of the World Cup. If you're going to look at 10 greatest catches of the World Cup over the years, Leverock will be there. That's the one reason why Bermuda will be remembered in World Cup history. That one of their fielders, who was a giant of a man, who defied every notion of the modern fit sports person, is the one who takes one of the greatest catches in World Cup history. So, if there is one moment in 2007 that brings a smile to the face, it's Leverock's catch. You watch Leverock's catch and you say, wow, maybe one day I can also get my name in World Cup history.
But that, smile or that happiness as you...
He runs right across.
Yes, he does a victory lap.
I mean, he does a Usain Bolt in slow motion, but it's good enough.
He does almost a victory lap after taking that catch. In fact, that was one of the highlights of that game. You talk about it brought a smile to your face. The Indian team was also smiling after that loss to Bangladesh, but they had a do or a die game versus Sri Lanka, which at the moment were topping the charts, topping the table. They were also seeded higher than India at that time in that World Cup. Sri Lanka bat first, get 250 odd. I know slow, low pitches is what you get in the West Indies, but you think it's a do or die game. India will chase it down, but India go on to lose by a huge margin of 69 runs to Sri Lanka. Again, the record in chief, no points for guessing who could that be. Muthaiya Muralidharan picks up 3 wickets. I think a couple of wickets go to Chaminda Vas. And that's where the scrutiny of Greg Chappell starts. Because, in this game, Sachin gets a duck. You have MS Dhoni who gets a duck. But, Sachin's batting at number 4 here. That game against Bermuda, he was batting at number 6. That game against Bangladesh, who was batting at 4. Robin Uthappa opened in one game, was at number 3 another game. Virender Sehwag opened in one game at number 3. I think Dravid was number 5 on an occasion and number 6 on some other occasion. So you kept changing the batting order. I think the biggest criticism that went against Greg Chappell was that here's a man, that's Sachin Tendulkar, who's arguably the greatest opener in white ball cricket. You ask him to bat at number 4 because you accommodated a Virender Sehwag, a Robin Uthappa, you had a sort of Ganguly bat higher than him. And this constant changing to the batting order, people thought that the Indian team wasn't set. And I understand Greg Chappell's idea. Probably today you might, maybe he was ahead of his time. Today you see where you have a situation where you hear from the captain saying, listen, we want every batter to be used to batting at any position. You start seeing batters being sent at different position based on the situation and the kind of batting they do. But at that time, that was the criticism against Greg Chappell. And after India loses, they're out.
Greg Chappell is an icon of the sport. I mean, he's one of the greatest Australian batsmen of all time. And meeting him was like meeting an encyclopedia of cricket. In terms of his wisdom, his knowledge about the game, he was clearly a professor of cricket in a way. And I think Greg Chappell was perhaps unable to deal with the egos and the pressures of Indian cricket. He would have been much better off perhaps dealing with an under-19 team where he could actually mold players. He was looking to mold a team. You see, how do you do that when you have already legends of the game in your team? A Sachin Tendulkar doesn't need to be molded. He just needs to be given the freedom to express himself. Ditto a Virender Sehwag, ditto a number of Indian cricketers who played for several years in the game. I think Greg Chappell made that cardinal mistake of seeing someone like a Sachin Tendulkar as someone also that he was going to mold into a new kind of player. Tendulkar didn't need that. Tendulkar needed the confidence to go and say, look, you're the best opening batsman we have, just go and open. And I remember asking Sachin about this, and he was very reflective, introspective about it, because he himself was the one who had brought in a way, along with sort of Greg Chappell, thinking he would bring in new ideas, new energies. Rahul Dravid bought into it. Rahul Dravid, I think, was the one senior player who bought into Greg Chappell's mantra. The others didn't. And you could see that in the field. I feel sorry for Indian cricket and Greg Chappell. I think both of them were not able to use each other, and a number of players were left with a lot of bad blood, recrimination. You talk to them about, I remember Saurav Ganguly, he says, Greg Chappell, not my kind of guy. And this is the same person who brought him in. Yeah. And so it was very depressing, I think, for Indian cricket that Greg Chappell became the villain of what went wrong in 2007.
Not just Saurav Ganguly, you speak to a Virender Sehwag today, a VVS Lakshman, everyone has horror stories to narrate when it comes to Indian cricket at the time. But that game that India played versus Sri Lanka, they lose that particular game, and after that they are knocked out. In fact, I was in the same team hotel as the Indian team, Rajdeep, and I can tell you, India couldn't take the flight back because they still had to wait for Bangladesh to play Bermuda. Technically, India still had a chance. If Bermuda was to cause an upset and beat Bangladesh, no one expected that to happen, but technically you could not leave the hotel. I can't remember a more depressing time in an Indian team hotel. Indian players were never seen outside their room for those 2 days. Nobody even came for breakfast at that time. I remember that Bermuda-Bangladesh game. At one stage, it looked like Bermuda might cause an upset. It wasn't to be. Bangladesh goes on to win the game. India is knocked out. India take the flight back from Barbados. I take the same flight back with them. Never forget that scene. We take the flight from Trinidad to Barbados. From Barbados, the team's flying to the UK, and I'm flying with them, coming back home, because our campaign is also over. And that same flight, it was a British Airways flight, had got in hundreds of Indian fans who were coming in for the Super 8 stage because they had bought tickets to watch India versus Pakistan in Barbados. And so all those fans really coming out. And then at that moment, I'm entering in, and I can see those fans literally swearing at the Indian team as they walk into the airport, as they are about to take that flight, because India-Pakistan turned out to be Ireland versus Bangladesh. So that's how that World Cup really panned out. Sri Lanka had beaten New Zealand in the semi-final. Australia once again beat South Africa, and then you had the final in Barbados. It was Australia versus Sri Lanka. But unfortunately now, for the third final in a row after 1999, when you saw the Australian team win a one-sided final, 2003, again the Australian team win a one-sided final. 2007, I'm afraid, Rajdeep, it was going to be third time in a row. A hat-trick of wins for Australia, but all one-sided final. But the entire final quite literally turned out to be a damp squib because it was raining. I reached the stadium there. I'd gone back after the India campaign, but came for the semis and the finals. And this is a final, it's raining, we don't know whether it's going to happen today. There was a reserve day, of course, but then eventually it's a shortened game. It's a 38-over game to begin with, and then it is an Adam Gilchrist show.
You know, cricket in the West Indies is not ideal for an Indian cricket fan because the game started 8 p.m. So by the time they're over, it's about 2 or 3 in the morning. So it's not prime time in that sense in India. It's also a difficult place to fly from one place to another. You don't have the greatest flight, air connectivity. And the West Indies themselves were not a great team. And they were not in the final. Then you come to a final and it starts raining. You just feel that this is a tournament where everything's possibly gone wrong. And then comes Adam Gilchrist. I still remember I was at a friend's house. We were waiting for the match to start. We'd almost given up hope that the match would at all start. There could be a reserve day. And I remember distinctly almost preparing to leave my friend's house when we are suddenly told there's a match. Australia is batting, and Adam Gilchrist is quite simply at the peak of his powers. You know, if you look at the Australians who won 3 World Cups, there's Ricky Ponting, of course, twice captain, once 1999 as well. There is the great Glenn McGrath, who was, you know, always there to sort of lift their bowling side. But Adam Gilchrist, according to me, was the game changer. If there's one cricketer who changed the way white ball cricket was to be perceived in the 2000s, it's much like what Jayasuriya was doing earlier, or a Martin Crowe, all pioneers in their way. Gilchrist, at his best, just was destructive. And it was clinical. There's, of course, the great story of the squash ball in his gloves. He's had a bad tournament. He's not been able to score runs. And I once tried it, you know, tried thinking that I might become an Adam Gilchrist, tried to put a golf ball in my gloves and say, look, this might make me sort of get the kind of levers to hit, you know, hit the ball hard and far. Couldn't do it.
Yeah.
Adam Gilchrist is a genius. He has redefined, to my mind, what a wicketkeeper batsman will be. I don't think any team now can afford to have a wicketkeeper in white ball cricket who's primarily there for his wicket-keeping skills and does a bit of batting. You're going to have to be a very good batsman who does decent wicket-keeping. He changed the rules of the game. And in that match, clean hitting. You know, to make Matthew Hayden look quote-unquote ordinary is not easy. But on that day, Gilchrist was the big show. Remarkable innings, just batted Sri Lanka out of the match. 38 odd overs, you scored 288 and 9 runs and over. You virtually won the match.
In fact, that squash ball story, he told the press right after the final was over that he wasn't getting a lot of runs, so decided to put the squash ball. He was asked that how is it that you managed to put it, because your gloves are anyways tight, so he explains how he squeezed it in. And I think he had a very unusually high grip. Never held the bat very low down there, so unusually high grip kind of helped his batting. But you're right, you talk about Matthew Hayden. That team, I mean, arguably, you speak to most cricket pundits will say, was the greatest, the 2007 Australian team, the greatest white ball team you could have assembled. That's also taking into account the 2003 team. Just to give you an idea, you had someone like Michael Hussey, Mr. Cricket himself, batting at number 7 in that team. You had a Glenn McGrath, who turned out to be the man of the series, the man of the World Cup. You had an out-and-out quick fast bowler in a Sean Tate. You also had a Brad Hogg as a wrist spinner. So it's a well-rounded team, batting lineup till Hussey. Matthew Hayden, that day, they had an opening stand of 172. Hayden only got 38. Can you keep a man like Matthew Hayden so quiet? And there's another guy at the other end who gets 149 of 100-odd deliveries and completely bat Sri Lanka out of that game.
If I could get the War brothers and Vaughan into this team and then have 8 players from this team, you'd probably have the perfect team. You know, Shane Warne was one of those cricketers who could do white ball cricket as well as red ball. Steve Waugh, Mark Waugh, let's add them to the Pontings, the Husseys, the Haydens, the Gilchrists, the McGraths, the Brett Lees. You've got a perfect team then. So I think 99 to 2007, the players who played for Australia, take the best out of them. I don't think you had a better one-day team. An ideal match would be that team versus Lloyd's 1975 West Indians. I think
Right.
that would be, to my mind, a match made in heaven.
The game was further reduced because there was more rain. So 38 overs is what Australia batted. 33 overs is what, 36 overs, I beg your pardon, is what Sri Lanka was going to get. But there's an interesting twist. Just as the tournament, it had all the controversies. It had two of the biggest teams, the biggest crowd pullers in India, Pakistan getting knocked out early. And then a very long tournament of 47 days. The format got criticized, all of that. And you thought all the controversies were done. Anything that could really pull this World Cup down was done. No, you had another thing coming. And that was in the final 33rd over. Sri Lanka are 8 down. They need about 60 odd runs in 16 deliveries. The lights completely gone out because remember, this was not a day and night encounter. It was a day encounter. And the Sri Lankan captain in Mahela Jayawardene takes the light. He says, okay, it's done. And we're pretty much okay to walk off. Australia think they've won it. It's, 3 overs short of that 36 overs that they have to bowl. And the Australian team starts celebrating. I remember being at the ground. The groundsmen are literally going to come out and remove those hoardings and so on and so forth. And then comes Alimdar, taps Ricky Ponting on the shoulder, says, no, you have to bowl another 3 overs. And Ricky says, you know what, are you joking? I mean, 20 overs, the mandated 20 are done. The ODI is done. Both captains have spoken. He's taken the light with the winners. He says, no, you technically have to go and bowl those 3 overs. Those 3 overs are bowled in pitch darkness. You won't realize that, Rajdeep, because the camera, you can open the iris up a bit and make it look like that it's visible. But I was at the ground. It was dark. The only lights you could see was the lights in the stand. Sri Lanka, sportingly enough, Australia continue to bowl their spinners. They just, defend the balls that have to be played, those remaining 18 deliveries. And then for a second time, Australia celebrate that victory. They're third-time winners of that particular tournament. So I guess a tournament that had so much of criticism come its way, this probably was poetic justice in that sense that it finished also this way.
And I think it's fair enough to say that Australia was the dominant team of that decade. It'll be very surprising that you'll find another team that will win 3 consecutive World Cups. Not easy. It's not happened in the Football World Cup, and it's not happened. The Brazilians came the closest to doing that, 58, 62, and then 70. Cricket, 3 World Cups in a row, which means that you've been a dominant team, and that was a dominant Australian team. But I think as we prepare our audiences for the next show, the good news is Indian cricket learned some of the lessons of 2007.
Yeah, it was not going to be 4 in a row for Australia because next up is going to be the 2011 World Cup. I don't tell you who won that particular tournament. That's going to be a very long episode. But what this World Cup did was change the format of the World Cup completely. As soon as the ICC realized that, hey, India, Pakistan were knocked out because of the format. The format was changed. It was literally now, you could even go on to say it's literally fixed, where you get to see an India-Pakistan game to begin with, and you're ensured of at least a 1 India-Pakistan game every World Cup. So the format changed from there on in 2007. It had a few memorable moments as well, but mostly you'll remember it for all the controversies. I'm afraid that's all the time that we have on this episode of World Cup Rewind. Next up, as Rajdeep has already told you, it's the 2011 World Cup. Those words are going to echo in our minds. Dhoni hits it out in style. India win the World Cup in Ravi Shastri's bombastic voice.
We'll come to that next time round. That's the World Cup to look forward to. Thanks for watching World Cup Rewind.
What a great day for Indian cricket.